So let's move on. Obviously, big news for the 49ers yesterday. Fred Warner signed. They've signed Fred Warner to a 5-year, I believe, $95 million deal, making him the highest paid linebacker in history. Well deserved. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about is you kind of contrasted or compared him to Patrick Willis and kind of his ascension as well, and that was getting some critiques on the internet. But can you go over, one, because I think you're high on Fred Warner, correct?
Oh, he's probably my favorite player right now.
Beautiful. So let's go delve into what causes him to be so elite, and then if you can also bring in, some of those similarities that you see with Patrick Willis, who obviously is in 49er folklore as far as how great he was for our team.
Yeah, well, I think for one thing, I think a lot of fans are nostalgic for Pat, and it's perfectly understandable. I think the first jersey I owned when I could afford it growing up was a Patrick Willis jersey in my early 20s. So I love Patrick Willis. I loved when he came out. I loved how he played the game early on, and then Fangio's scheme just elevated him to Hall of Fame status if he wasn't already there before then. So you can't say enough about the guy. Now, Fred Warner, in my opinion, is on the same level. In year three, after year three, for both guys, I think Warner was at Willis's level after his third year. And I think he's just going to continue to get better and better. And he's not even in his prime. Hopefully the injuries and things like that don't catch up with him like they kind of did with Patrick at the end of his career, and kind of force him into retirement. But they're on the same trajectory. When you have to kind of dig around, but the things are out there, and you can go watch, on YouTube and probably some other places, early Patrick Willis games in his rookie year. And you can see that Fred Warner does all the same stuff. Fred Warner was calling plays in his first game. So was Patrick Willis. They both have great range. Patrick Willis, I think, ran a 4.4. I don't know if Warner was quite that fast, but you've seen Warner's range in the last 3 years and how he covers, between the numbers. He's everywhere, and that's why they ask him to do everything. I mean, the 49ers are a defensive scheme where when they go empty, but the offense goes empty, the 49ers defense is putting Warner on the number 3 in trips. I mean, teams are going to send out a nickel or a dime defender or put a safety on somebody like that, and with the way teams move around that number 3 receiver, a number 3 could be Julio Jones, or it could be Hollywood Brown on the Ravens, and Warner's going to stay with them stride for stride across the field.
Right. Most quarterbacks would see a linebacker line up against one of their receivers, and that's where they're going. They're changing the route that's where you're going with the ball. But you can't do that with Warner.
Yeah. The league is like majoring in 3x1. Everybody is running more 3x1 than ever before. So
can you explain a little bit what that means, 3x1?
Yeah, 3x1 is trips, 3 receivers to one side and 1 receiver to the single side, or single receiver side, basically, or tight end in a inline formation. But basically, it's just a trips formation look, whether it's a bunch, a stack alignment, or traditional, spread out across the field. And Warner is that. Basically, they call him the final 3 defender. And it doesn't matter who the number 3 is. Warner's responsibility is either playing a wall technique where he doesn't let number 3 run across the field, or he's carrying number 3 across the field. Because what teams like to do with the number 3 receiver is run them, deep across, like on a deep crosser or whatever. And every time Warner is that guy. He runs step for step with Tyler Lockett, who's one of the best deep threats the league has. I mean, he did a baseball speed turn with Hollywood Brown in that Ravens game in the rain on a soaked field, and stayed with him stride for stride in that 2019 game and broke up a pass. And even when he's not like matching up man coverage like that, or a man match in a man match scheme, where basically man match is if a guy runs into your area, then you're running with him no matter what he does. His responsibility is eliminating that middle threat receiver. So like against the Browns, I tweeted out a play yesterday where he basically gets in the throwing lane for the number 3. So Baker Mayfield bypasses him, tries to go to the number 2, and Warner just slides across to the number 2 and removes that one. And by that point, Mayfield's scrambling and has to throw the ball out of bounds. I mean, that's just what Fred Warner is. He understands the game at a level I don't think people realize, and I don't think people truly appreciate how much he does in the course of a game that you don't see like that. On the
and that's kind of
broadcast
what,
angle. Yeah,
I'm
you
sorry.
don't.
I won't. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, just real quick. On the broadcast angle for that Browns play, you don't see him do any of that because it's off screen because it's deeper downfield, like 15, 20 yards. And that's a lot of what he's doing. He's removing a lot of options and forcing quarterbacks to look elsewhere. And that's, a good chunk of the reason why the 49ers pass rush was so good in 2019 is because he's allowing those guys to get home. That's not to say that Bosa and everybody isn't good and can't get home in less than 2.5 seconds, because they can. But when you can't get home in that amount of time, because not every elite pass rusher can do that, having a guy like Warner who can lock down the middle of the field is key, because then it just allows everybody to do other things, and you don't have to worry about getting another safety out there to do something. Linebackers that can cover are not easy to find, and that's where Warner separates himself.
And that's what's really interesting, because the difference between Warner and Willis. Obviously, Willis was a top 15th. I think he went 11th, right, for the 49ers the year that they drafted him, and Warner went in the 3rd round, right? So,
yeah.
So obviously, usually that's because physically imposing, he maybe didn't look at the athlete that they want, the prototypical middle linebacker. So, and you kind of alluded to it, he's making up for a lot of maybe where he's not physically as talented as other players in his position with his football IQ, correct?
Absolutely.
And you say you see that through the tape.
And because when he played at BYU, he wasn't an off the ball linebacker. He was a hybrid, like safety / outside edge defender type, played in that type of role in the box. So he has a lot of knowledge about playing coverage and, how to read play development and things like that. He's got one of the fastest triggers I've ever seen when he sees, even going back to his rookie season last night, I went and watched like the first game against Minnesota and tweeted out some plays. Like, he's just very quick. When he recognizes it, he goes, and he recognizes it, right 99% of the time. And that was Willis to me. I mean, in my opinion, right now, Warner looks faster on the field than Willis did in year 3. And it's just, the game is different. I mean, Willis had the range, but, teams weren't throwing it all over the yard like they are now, where a guy like Warner comes in and locks that down. But, that's not to take anything away from Pat, because he has, there was his game against the Cardinals or the Jets or whatever his rookie season. He had that pick where he just basically dropped deep into a zone down the sideline and picked off a pass over the middle or between the numbers or whatever. I can't remember where it was, but he started out like at the hash and just ended up in his spot where the quarterback put it at the numbers or just outside, and he picked it. Like, he just got good extension, jumped up and picked it. Like, I'm like, man, I didn't think we'd ever see something like that again. And then,
right.
You get guys like Bobby Wagner, who's kind of like the bridge between Willis and Warner. And then Warner comes in and does that 10 times better and does everything, I think a lot more for the defense than Willis did at the time, because it's just a different league than it was 10 years ago.
I mean, having that middle linebacker with that coverage just gives you so much freedom as a defensive coordinator, because you don't have to bring in, like you said, an extra corner. You could leave kind of like the package that you have out there. And the one thing we didn't even talk about, you're talking about just on field what he's able to do. He also brings a high character type player in your locker room, and one of an elite leadership style, which is amazing to have. I think it was a no-brainer re-sign for the 49ers. I'm glad that they gave him the money, and even if maybe there's some issues with cap in the future, I think it's well worth it to spend it on a guy like this. This wasn't a mistake of a contract in any stretch, I would say.
No. And when you have a guy who's arguably probably a top 10 player in the league and probably a top 3 defensive player, arguably, you have to pay him.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.